welcome back to another episode of Colorado Politicking. I'm your host, Pat Poblete, joined this week by Colorado Watch investigative reporter David Migoya. Now, David has been covering the scandal in regards to judicial discipline and kind of the latest revelation in that, which is that the Colorado Judicial Department, and by extension, the state Supreme Court, has refused to comply with the subpoena issued roughly 5 months ago by a Commission on Judicial Discipline in an effort to force the High Court's cooperation with this inquiry into alleged cover-ups of misconduct by judges. Now, that's kind of the top line information there, but that's a lot to digest. And David, you and I were talking right before we started offline here. This is a lot. You've been reporting on this for 3 years. Can you just, for a viewer who perhaps hasn't seen anything about the judicial discipline scandal, can you give us like the 10,000-foot overview of what exactly it is you've been covering here?
Not sure you can do it in 10,000 feet, but I'll give it a try. It all literally, Pat, this all started with a beanbag chair. And it was someone within Judicial Department who was very high up, the chief of staff, was to get a reimbursement for the purchase of an item, a beanbag chair, was told they couldn't do it within that fiscal year. And rather than apply the next fiscal year, which would have only been a week, she apparently decided to alter the receipt and forged it and attempted to get back her $150. Fast forwarding, she found herself getting fired over that, decided then to, instead of being fired, to lay out a whole litany of allegations of judicial misconduct that she had witnessed. She had been the human resources director at Judicial over a number of years, of which her allegation is that this misconduct and had gone unpunished, uncovered for years. It was a pattern. And for her to be disciplined for something so inconsequential, when in fact the department had allowed this type of stuff to go on by the judges for years, you could see. And she was prepared to file a discrimination lawsuit. And in that lawsuit would reveal this misconduct. The allegation then came is that the Chief Justice of our Supreme Court at the time, Nathan Coates, was told about this and basically said, how do we make it go away? And what she was given instead of being fired was a multi-million-dollar contract for, get this, judicial training. Now, she was eminently qualified for that. The problem was, it went up for public bid. Nobody bid on it because it was too narrowly written for anybody to bid. And then she, with the approval of everybody within the upper echelon of Judicial, was awarded the contract. That's when I found out about it, uncovered it. 3 people resigned as a result. They canceled the contract. Fast forward a couple of years, we find out that that contract was actually given because of this memo in which they said I was going to sue, she was going to sue. And if you don't give me something, I'm going to go with that. That started this whole unraveling of investigations into all of that conduct. Now, most recently, in which you just pointed out, a subpoena was issued by the Colorado Commission on Judicial Discipline. This is the outfit whose job it is under our state constitution to investigate and discipline judges. The problem with that system is it's entirely put together by our Supreme Court, the ones who are intimately involved in this whole problem. Judicial discipline wanted some information. The High Court turned around and said, no, we don't actually think you have the authority to subpoena anybody unless you actually go to a formal proceeding. What they said was, all you're trying to do is investigate, and because of that, we're not going to pay attention to your subpoena. This came up at a legislative hearing. An interim special committee was put together of 8 legislators, 4 senators, 4 representatives, and their function over the next couple of months is to take a look at whether or not Colorado's method of judicial discipline needs to be overhauled. Part of that would actually require a constitutional amendment put to voters to fix all this and remove the authority to oversee this process by the Supreme Court.
So let me jump in right there, Dave, because you gave us a really good baseline overview of everything you've been reporting on. In not so many words, I have to say, if you're watching on Colorado Politics, you can look just below us. You'll see plenty of links to all of David's reporting on this, so you can kind of get more in depth on anything that he just talked about there. But let's talk specifically about that constitutional amendment, because that's a hard process. It's hard, and intentionally so, to get something put into the state constitution. Why is it that that's what it's going to take in order to kind of overhaul the system that, as you've laid out, it does not seem to be very fair or work very well at all?
Voters had set this whole process up when they put it into the Constitution a number of years ago. And that amendment, and I believe it's Amendment 3 or 4, it's one of the early ones, basically said that the authority to oversee this process lays with our Supreme Court. What was never contemplated was that any of the discipline or investigations that were to occur on anybody within the court. What it did contemplate was that if a justice was under investigation or was intimately conflicted for any reason, that they would have to recuse, but it didn't deal with the remainder of the court. So if the investigation deals with one of the justices, the question is whether or not the other justices, because they work with them and know them quite well, whether they're conflicted and have to recuse. If that happens, there's no oversight authority. So the only way to fix the process is to change the very thing that put it in place in the first place. And that is the constitutional amendment. However, it's one thing to get an amendment onto the Constitution. It's quite another thing to fix an amendment that's already there. So that's going to be a very complicated process if it gets to that.
Is there any sense yet of what a fix would look like? Or is this all kind of theoretical? We've identified a problem. We don't really know how to fix it yet, but at least we can start there. Is that kind of where we're at right now?
I think it's a little bit of both. Because of the uniqueness of this situation, it had never been contemplated. That's what these hearings at the legislature are hopefully going to uncover, are the different things necessary to get to the end, which is to fix it. If there's to be a constitutional change, what the outcome would essentially be is that the Office of Judicial Discipline, which was newly created just now in order that they can get funded separately from the Supreme Court. Supreme Court had been controlling all the funding for the Discipline Commission. Because of that, things the commission wanted to do couldn't happen because they were refusing them the extra money in order to do the work they wanted to do. So in order to get that out from under, you literally have to create an entirely new Judicial Discipline Commission that's separate and apart from the Supreme Court. Could it happen? Absolutely. Is it easy? I'm not quite sure it's quite so easy, but it seems that it's going to have a fair amount of support, not only from the legislature in order to posit that before the voters, but in order for that to actually get passed by the voters, because so many voters want to see judicial discipline happen outside of the vacuum in which it does occur now.
Well, you touched on the legislature, and let's round out there because that is kind of our wheelhouse here at COPO. Who should we be looking at in terms of state house leaders? Who's really a prominent voice on this that's going to be driving this discussion?
That's a really great question, simply because people that are in front of that committee right now are term limited out. So really, when the next legislature sits into place, we might have to see some new faces take over. The ones that are sitting there driving this at the moment is Senator Pete Lee from Colorado Springs and Representative Terry, I'm blanking on Terry's last name.
Terry Carver.
Yes, thank you. They are in front of that, but you also have Senator Bob Gardner. A lot of these folks aren't going to be there in November. So one of the ones they're looking at is on the committee, newly appointed to the position, is Senator Kevin Van Winkle. He became a senator only this past Monday to fill in the unexpired term of Senator Hobart, who had moved to Florida. Kevin's running for that position, but it needed to be filled. And not only was he named, he had been a representative from Highlands Ranch in Douglas County. And they immediately gave him the appointment to this committee. So it might well be that Senator Van Winkle may well be the guy out in front. Another one is Senator Gonzalez out of Denver. She's also taken a fairly prominent role. She also sits on the House Legislative Audit Committee, which has been seeing a lot of the information in these investigations going through the state auditor's office. So there's a number of folks that have some involvement in it. Where does it end at the end? We'll have to see what the committee recommends. They are allowed by law to proffer up 3 different pieces of legislation. I have a funny feeling we'll see all 3 of them.
I'll close out by asking you about relations among the group of people that you just talked about, because as you list off those names, they span the political gamut in terms of the left to the right. I'm curious, are these lawmakers, are they fairly aligned in terms of their interests here? Are there completely different approaches? How is that going?
Well, it's kind of interesting too, because I haven't seen anything yet fall down the lines of the political parties that the Republicans are doing one thing and the Democrats suggesting something else. They seem to be very much in line with the idea that judicial discipline does have to improve. Just how far that improvement should go, I imagine, remains to be seen. But more importantly, some of those members are attorneys. So they're very cognizant of the type of world in which they live and make their living. So we might see it not fall by political lines, but fall more by occupational lines. That, I think, will be an interesting development as these committee hearings happen. There's 4 more coming.
I know that you'll be covering for us, so watch out for the bylines from David Migoya if you are at all interested in this. If those stories struck you, like I said, they're just below us. If you're watching on the Gazette or on Colorado Politics, Dave, thank you for joining us. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to fill us in with your fabulous reporting. For Dave, I've been Pat. Thank you so much for taking the time again, and we will see you next week.